Well, good evening, everybody. Here we go with a new lesson in Windows 10 computing. And today we're going to talk about interfaces. Like, what the heck is an interface? And what do we do with an interface? And what the heck does that have to do with me? So we're going to start slow, and we're going to continue on slowly and see if we can make some sense of this all, okay? We look at this. This is kind of a problem I see a lot, myself included, but with other people. I'm trying to drag a file to my desktop, but it won't go past the edge of my screen. Well, what's wrong with that? The guy has the wrong frame of reference, right? Yeah, his frame of reference is his desktop is where he's resting his elbows, right? But when he's working with the computer, his desktop is that screen on his computer. So if you can move your frame of reference from where your elbows are resting on the table to the desktop, if he could do that, he wouldn't have any problems at all. So what we're going to try to do today is we're going to upset your apple cart a little bit and try to change your frame of reference a little bit when it comes to working with computers. So I thought it was funny, and I actually had to ask my wife if she thought it was funny, because I didn't want to put something up there that wouldn't go over very well. Oh, well. You hear that, Marlene? It didn't go over very well. So I put together another set of notes here, and of course the notes that are online are better because you can click on the hyperlinks rather than see them written down, but it's kind of a good way to look at it. I especially like this picture here because we used to start out with big monitors and we were pretty small back then. But as time went on, our monitors got smaller and we got bigger, and pretty soon we slouched more and more and our monitors got smaller. And pretty soon we could barely fit our bellies under the table to reach over with laptops and things. You know, that's actually something that happened with me with networking. I thought networking was going to be so cool, because when you have networking, you can just move things from one computer to another. You don't have to move. But as my belt size went from 32 to 34 to 36 to 38 inches, I realized that it really wasn't such a great idea, and that it was a good idea to get up and move around once in a while rather than just sit in that chair. Just because I could didn't mean that I should. But anyway, we're going to talk about personal computers, interfaces, and we're going to emphasize Windows 10. The reason we're emphasizing Windows 10 for this presentation is because that's probably what most people are using. I see a Kindle Fire out there, but I know you have Windows 10 computer at home. And Windows 10 is a really good operating system if you're doing productivity type work. If you're just doing reading email or browsing the web, you don't really need a computer as powerful as Windows 10, because with great power comes great frustration. And so you need to be a little bit aware of what's in front of you and what you're working on. But we all know kind of know what a personal computer is. A personal computer is one of these things. One of these. Basically, it's the IBM PC, compatible PC, was called a personal computer. This is the PC users group. It wasn't the personal computers users group when it started out. It was the IBM compatible PC computer user group. But over the years, the jargon is changing. It's about the general concept of the personal computer. So that would put the Chromebook and the Kindle Fire and the iPad and all these other devices, the Surface, whatever you may have, it's going to put all of those into the category of personal computer. And that's kind of the definition that I'm going with along the way. Children can learn how to do it, and eventually will learn how to do it.
Well, Bruce, can we back up just, you said you don't have to go to Windows. Like, I had Windows 7.
Right.
I was very happy with Windows 7 doing what I was doing. But they kind of force you into going to Windows 10.
Right.
So, how are you not going to go to Windows 10?
You don't have to go to Windows 10.
Huh?
You have two
Well, then-
choices. You can not turn on your computer.
You have no security and you have no updates and,
You don't have to plug into the internet.
say what?
You don't have to plug into the internet if you don't want to. You can stay with Windows 7 as long as you
It's
want.
pretty tough to do emails.
You
It's
have
not
to
going
do
Well, they don't
email.
care.
Huh?
They don't care if you plug into the internet or not.
Well, but then you can't use email.
No, you cannot use email. Well, you can if you turn off all your updates and you don't allow it to update to Windows 10. There are lots of people out there who are still using Windows 7,
Mhm.
and you can still get security for Windows 7. You're just not going to get it from Microsoft.
Mm.
Microsoft isn't going to, they want you to play their game. They don't
Right.
want, they don't want you to tell them how to play their game.
Go to 10 or else.
Yeah, and then once they get everyone on 10, they'll move to the next version, whatever that
I
is.
thought this was the ultimate, the last version.
No, this is the last good version.
Oh, okay. I don't know, that 7 was pretty good.
You think you're gonna stop making money?
Right.
If they stop making systems, they stop making money.
So, but the emphasis today is going to be on interfaces, okay? And interfaces, I have a whole bunch of terminologies. In computing, the term interface can have various meanings, okay? It can refer to a hardware interface. So what's a hardware interface? Well, we have all these little holes and buttons and things, and we have a monitor. Those are all interfaces. They're basically things that connect us to the computer itself. But it can relate to the interaction between one object and another. Interface may refer to a hardware interface, a software interface. What would be an example of a software interface? It would be the actual program you're looking at. Like Excel, you'd see a spreadsheet. So Excel would be your interface for a spreadsheet. It can refer to the interaction between a user and a computer via an input device, such as a keyboard or a mouse. And this article, this first one here, basically goes through all kinds of different interfaces. And we may come back to this a little later if we have some extra time, but we're going to go through some different computer interfaces. If we look at software interfaces, and you can see, and I have links for almost all of these things right here. Go home and take a look at all of these links. But they all have different ways of interfacing between you, the user, the human, and the computer, the digital machine. Basically, it's just a big calculator. I think the most fantastic thing about these computers is that they have the ability to connect to so many different types of interfaces that you can do just about anything you want with them. All it takes is the smarts to be able to create an interface between whatever you want to connect to and the device itself. So there's almost an infinite number of things that you can connect to. And that's kind of the beauty of a computer. It's not a simple thing. It's a very intricate, complicated. It can be made to work easier. For example, something called plug and play. We all heard of plug and play. Well, back in the day when some of us started working with computers, you didn't have plug and play. You had to hook everything up manually from port number 74B to interface 16754A, you know, and if they would handshake, you were in good shape. If someone else was using that interface, you couldn't use it and you had to find another. So those were things that were quite a bit more difficult in the past, and those are things that have become a lot easier. Plus the interface with a command line, like when you use Unix or you use DOS command line, the character interface is a lot more complicated for a lot of people than a graphical user interface. And those are some of the things that we're going to be looking at today. There's all kinds of human interactions, human to computer, and they have fancy words. We can look at some of those as well. But the main thing is, for this group, I think we just want to be able to understand our computers a little better and Windows 10 rather than dive into the trenches for every little definition that there is out there. Make your computer easier to use is kind of an interesting subject here because some people have limitations. And so you can, if you have trouble with eyesight, You can turn on a magnifier. So that's a type of an interface, is a magnified interface on your desktop. This is Windows 10 stuff. You can turn on a narrator. What does a narrator do? It reads the stuff on the page to you, so it gives you a voice to human interface for you to work with. High contrast would be for people who can't see, normal colors. They need to have a wide range of contrast in order to differentiate between what they're seeing on the screen and not. And sticky keys. Who's ever seen the little sticky keys thing come up when they held their finger on a key too long? Yeah, so sticky keys are there for people who have difficulty, like someone has cerebral palsy or something, they have difficulty touching and holding. If they hold their finger on a key, instead of repeating 100 times, it will come up and ask you, do you want to, put this down once or multiple times? It actually tries to work with those people. And then you can have filter keys. So there's a whole bunch of things that Microsoft has done to make your experience fit who you are. And the computer is like a wonderful tool for people with disabilities or handicaps. What's the politically correct word for it these days? Challenges. Yeah, challenges. It really kind of levels the playing field, because a lot of people can now use systems that they couldn't use at all before. Even people who aren't as intelligent as Stephen Hawking can have a wheelchair that they can control with their breath or their voice or whatever. So it's pretty cool that the way the interfaces have grown over the years, especially for meeting people's needs who have challenges. I happen to be one of those people who have challenges. I'm a human being. And do I need to say anything more? Okay. The touch screen, is something that is pretty, I know we have iPads and phones and things like that, and things you can touch and move around, and they work really well for people who need that kind of interface, but I can touch this screen all day long and it's not going to do anything for me. So there has to be something else. But if you have like Tom over there, if you have a screen that you can only touch, it doesn't matter if you have a keyboard or not. I mean, he can't use it because he doesn't have one. So he gets to use a touch screen interface between his computer and his self. Okay? Speech recognition. A lot of people can't type very fast, but they like to write long letters. So you can use speech recognition to actually speak to your computer, and there's a whole language that can be used with a lot of rules and a lot of shortcuts for punctuation and things like that. We're going to take a look at that in a little while.
I think I just discovered something on this, Bruce.
What's that, Tom?
I can't go from the download to the interlink, it won't go to it.
You can't go from the down,
Yeah, like I have your screen up,
right?
if I click on one of these links, it won't go to it.
Yeah, it does.
It goes, see, like,
Yeah.
it brings them up down here.
Right, so click on one of those down on the bottom. Click on one of those boxes on the bottom. It should, is that what we're saying on the page there? So that's page number 2.
That is page number 2.
Yeah, so if you bring the slider along here, we're looking at 2 right now, if you go to 3, there's 3.
Well, yeah, I can do that.
Oh, you're saying you can't click on
I
the
can't
links?
get to the link, it won't take me to, like, where he is there. That's what I thought this would do, it wouldn't do it though.
So, don't buy a Kindle Fire, folks. If you want to survive,
It's not down the greatest little invention that I've found yet.
if you want to survive in my classroom, don't bring a Kindle Fire. Now, they're wonderful little computers, and I'm sure there is a way to do it, but we don't have the time
Yeah, right.
to deal
I
with
just
that
thought
right
that'd be
now.
interesting. That's
So I wanted to talk about these funny little ports and things on the side of your computer. You have all these little holes. This one's for headphones on mine, and then we have earplugs. Then we have USB and another USB and a network. Those are all interfaces. I know you can't see it on the iPad there. I'll just hold it up real briefly. And you have the cable for the internet, well, that's an interface with the network, right? You have, this is a USB interface that connects to the mouse. So we have all these little interfaces, but this is sort of a, montage of different USB interfaces that are out there right now. The one we don't have up here is type 1, but it looks just like type A. But what would you use this kind of interface for on your computer? You can plug in a mouse. What else can you plug into that interface?
Keyboard.
You can plug in a keyboard. How about a printer? You know? What else can you plug in there?
Monitor.
Monitor or a light. There's all kinds of things. So that's why they call it USB, because U stands for what?
Universal.
Universal, right. So we have a universal serial bus. Now the word serial is there as opposed to parallel, okay? Remember the old parallel port printers? And they used to send their data downstream with a bunch of ribbon cables right next to each other, and the data would travel over each one of those cables at the same speed, and they reach your printer, and then they start printing. So that was a parallel interface. The big problem with a parallel interface is that it didn't do very well over long distances, and it didn't have, it had other issues along the way. So now most of our printing is done through serial ports, because serial information is sent in little packets. Remember how we talked last week about how packets were sent out on the internet and they all carried a payload? That way they knew where they were coming from and where they were going and what they were supposed to do. Well, the same thing happens in a universal serial bus. It knows how to send and receive information and how to interpret it. Back in this version 2 here, this is what my mouse is plugged into right now. Does anybody recognize what this little interface would plug into? Anybody? I know you've seen them.
Yeah.
Printer, right. Yeah, this is a typical USB type B connector, okay? They're both USB 2, so this is A and this is B, okay? So it's just a different style. They both give the same rate of information transfer, but they have a little bit different interface. And why do they have this on the other end? Well, because that's what's in the printer, and if you don't have this on this end, it won't plug into the printer. You know, there's no easier way to say it. It's just the way that the printer companies decided that this is the best interface for our printers, and that's why you see them there. This one looks kind of the same, and this looks almost exactly the same, but they're different, okay? This has a little blue line in here, and this is blue here. This is what we call USB 3, okay? And the main thing you notice with USB 3 is that the speed is over 5 times faster. But when we first started seeing the USB ports on computers and the USB ports on printers, and you tried to plug your USB 3 or your USB 2 into a USB 3 port on your computer, your printer didn't work because they didn't build the proper drivers for it yet. Now, what's a driver? It's a software program that communicates between a device and another device, okay, or a program. Usually it's between, like if you click on the print icon on a program and it goes and it communicates with your printer, it's a driver that makes that connection, and it's a driver that allows you to actually print. So until they came out with the proper drivers that allowed you to plug your regular printer into USB 3 port on your computer, it just didn't work very well. But now we have them working. Now the USB 3 printers are working now, and they've had a little time to straighten things out. This carries data quite a bit faster. Now you see this little symbol here looks kind of like a trident to the right of the SS. So that's the universal symbol for a USB port. Okay, that's USB. What does this SS mean? What happens if you get a white or a black piece of plastic in here, spacer, and it says, has this symbol on the plug itself? What does that mean? That means that this plug, even though it looks like a USB 2, is a super speed plug. It's going to be USB 3. They just didn't use the color code that's industry standard. Okay. On this one here, if you look really close, you can actually see the symbol and an SS in front of it. But basically, this means a high-speed port. And I've run into multiple computers where you have a regular-looking USB 2 port, but it will have this symbol, SS, with the USB symbol on it, and it's a super speed or high-speed port. So go ahead and look at your ports at home, especially if you don't have a newer computer that has a USB 3 port on it, and see if any of them have the little SS to the left of that symbol, because you may already have a high-speed port on your computer. They've been around for 8-10 years, so it's very possible that they didn't color code it to the blue. Okay, USB 3.1 gives you even more speed. Okay, it's twice what 3.0 gave us. I thought 3.0 was pretty good, but 3.1 gives us 10 gigabytes per second, which is actually pretty quick. And this is actually the same one you see. It's called USB Type-C. And you're seeing these come out on pretty much all the computers these days, all the new computers. I know your Chromebook has a USB-C on it, and doesn't your Surface has a C on it? So all the new computers are able to talk at this faster speed. Plus they're, for the most part, they're backward compatible. You can plug this USB-C cable into the side of your computer, and this one does not have one. It's an older computer. But you can actually put a hub on there where you can have HDMI cables or USB 2 or 3 slots in there where you can plug in these cables.
That's my electrical.
Or you can run electricity through it. Yeah, you can charge through there as well.
Yeah, is that a universal?
Yes, it's a USB Type-C, 3.1 Type-C. And it's one of the more advanced ones out there. Then we have some other plugs that you might hook up devices to, like Android devices, Android phones, or different types of phones and things like that, which are actually micro and mini. But we don't really use those much with our PCs. Those will be more with mobile devices and phones and things like that. On the Apple side, we have the Lightning plug, okay, and we have Thunderbolt, and those are very similar to USB, but of course they're Apple specifications. They don't comply exactly to this standard right here. Now, what kind of adapters are these? Digital adapters. Okay, so.
Hold that one out.
Good job. So we kind of beat this horse the other day, but what's the difference between analog, what's an example of an analog situation? The 33 1/3 long play record, okay? Every little modulation is caught somewhere in a curve of sound that when your needle runs over those scratches, it gives you every little sound that comes out. That's what analog does. It's actually a much more pure signal, but it's harder to give that to everybody all the time. If you're using a digital environment, it's easier to deliver information to more people easily. So we have basically two types of digital adapters here. In a lot of older computers, you'll see this one here. Does anyone know what that's called? DVI. DVI is the name of this digital adapter. Remember, once again, a digital adapter sends things in little packets. So the theory behind digital is, it's kind of like these bulbs right here. Who can see these things flashing on and off 60 times a second? So we don't really care whether it's flashing off and on 60 times a second. They're all 60 cycle bulbs, which means that they go off and on every 60 seconds because our brain can't really tell the difference. Well, with using digital signals, whether you're using it on a monitor or whether you're using for music, listening to digital music, they do something, once again, we talked about this earlier, it's called sampling, where they take a cut of the music here, then one next to it, and one next to it, and one next to it. The more sampling you have, the more samples you have, the more pure your sound is going to be. The wider apart it is, the less time it takes, and the easier it is to transport that sound, like over a telephone. You don't really need super high quality sampling to understand what someone is saying on the phone. So our new digital phones use digital sampling as well as MP3, CDs and things like that as compared to a 33 1/3 long play, high fidelity, vinyl record player. But I tell you, your audiophile, someone who likes every little bit of sound, who wants to get it all, is going to go out and buy the vinyl record instead of listening to digital music, because they will find fault with it, because it doesn't give you the whole spectrum. It just gives you a little sampling along the way of what that music actually is. If the sampling is done well, and if the file is large enough. For example, if you were to burn a CD to a computer, you have a choice of what rate do you want to burn, or what sampling rate. The higher the sampling rate you take, the more space it's going to take on your hard disk, and the better the sound it's going to give you. But if you want to preserve space, you can take a much smaller sample. It will still sound really good. Most people won't be able to tell the difference at all, and it will take a lot less space on your hard drive. Yes?
I was under the impression on vinyl, you had to compress the dynamic range, whereas on a CD, you could have a much wider dynamic range.
You can in the sound, but what I'm talking about is just the waves
Quality.
itself. So I'm talking about the wavelength. What I'm saying in digital is like you get one packet, then you get another packet, then you get another packet, and the tighter the sampling is, the tighter the sound is going to be. Whereas on an analog environment, every little scratch in that groove is going to make some kind of impression on the speaker, and if you're really into hearing that quality of sound, it's going to give you a much fuller spectrum of sound. So an audiophile, someone who loves records and music and things like that, will spend a lot of money for vinyl because they want to have that full spectrum of sound.
Is it digital because it's ones and zeros?
Yeah, it's ones and zeros, it's off or on, but it's more than that. What it's doing is it's sending packets of information along the line that carry lots of ones and zeros along with it.
Right.
And that is, when the more packets you have, the better quality of sound you're going to get, because there's less blank space in the middle, right? But if you want to just make a phone conversation and understand what somebody's saying, your sampling quality doesn't need to be really high. Okay? So if you're making a mobile phone call, you'll notice that sometimes it sounds better than other times. It just depends on what the sampling rate is coming out of the towers, and also the ISP and things like that when you're making those types of calls. So the reason I highlighted this, though, is that this is a digital adapter, and this is a digital adapter, and they both pretty much do the same thing. And this one here is this one plugs into a special little groove, HDMI groove, and this one plugs into another little groove, and it's a DVI groove, okay? And we have male and female sides to these adapters. So what is it called? What's it called when you put a male adapter into a female plug and then you change it to a different type of adapter? They call that being a gender bender. Okay? Gender bender. I thought you'd enjoy that word. A gender bender is an adapter that allows you to go from one type of plug to another using switching male and female and so it will fit into the plug itself. This is, I believe this one is a male, and this one will be the female one right there. For the type of- It's
Do you lose
confusing.
anything when you use one of those?
Hmm?
Do
You lose nothing.
Wow.
Yeah, because DVI and HDMI are both digital technology, and all of these little points in here will match up to through little points in here, so you're not losing anything in this type of adapter. Okay? There's an adapter for everything, pretty much. So here's some other adapters. Now these are analog adapters, so I know we've all seen these. Okay? So this will be the male here. This will be the female here. Now we got a little adapter there. It's an analog adapter. What happens if you, what do you need to change this from can I plug into here an HDMI adapter from my computer and go to an analog monitor?
Yes.
Yeah, I can do that. So I can play off a digital monitor, but you can't go the other way. And I'm hoping I'm not getting that backwards, because certain monitors, in order to work, have to have power coming to them, and the power comes from the computer. So if you're trying to drive a monitor with the wrong kind of adapter, it's just not going to work. Okay. So this picture here shows, this is actually this piece over here, and you can actually plug this into here, and then this would plug into your computer. There's actually a little cable that goes around here like that. They don't show the whole cable here. But this is the part that will go into your computer, okay? And then this would, you'd have to plug a cable like this into here, and then this would go to your monitor on the other end, and that would be the interface between the monitor and the computer itself. So looking at some different types of interfaces here, we have some command line interfaces, but basically what we're looking at on this page is that we have a user here, and then we have our hardware. So for example, I'm the user, and this is the hardware here, okay? So how do all these things connect with each other? Well, the user likes to have a graphical user interface. We all like to have a GUI that we can click on the icons and things like that. And that graphical user interface is controlled by a portion of your computer called a display server. It actually, a server is basically, when you hear the word server, you're basically are supposed to think it's something that performs a function for you, okay? It serves you in a way, it's your servant. Well, this display server serves up a display to us using a Windows Manager, and then that in turn gets its information from something called the kernel, and the kernel is part of the operating system that communicates between the user interface and the hardware itself, and then you have the hardware here. So going back in the other direction, you have the hardware, which talks to the kernel, which talks to the display server that works with the Windows Manager to give us a graphical interface so that the user can make some sense of what's on the screen. Okay? Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. Here we have a command line interface. Okay, and why are we calling this an interface? Because it's presenting a command line place for the user to work. It's a workspace. Okay, it's our workspace interface. And what's the difference between this command line here and this command line here? They're both on the same computer. What does this say in here? Administrator. Right. So what's the difference between the administrator and the regular user? The administrator has a lot more rights and privileges. So I can do a lot of things from the administrator. from the administrator command prompt, and we'll continue in 5 minutes.
Finger bone connect to the hand bone.